Okay, let's put a bit more flesh on the bones from my talk this morning. Heard two very interesting talks earlier on about A3 and about learning to see or mapping, value stream mapping, both of which are, are really good ways to begin to build your capabilities. Value stream mapping helps you see at least your part of the process, and A3, actually the value of A3 is clarifying the thought process. The great thing you learn from looking at an A3 is not only what the scope of the problem you were trying to solve and the thought process or the steps you went through in trying to solve it, but it tells you everything. It makes visible the thought process behind it. So I can tell from reading somebody's A3 how they think about solving a problem. And it's how we think about solving a problem. It's building that common language through learning by doing the A3, by doing a value stream map, which is often part of an A3. That's what I mean by building capabilities. So I would judge an organization not by what lean tools it knows and who knows them, that's one thing, much more by what are the capabilities in the organization, the critical parts of the organization, and how would I develop those capabilities? And later on, how would I assess the capability gaps? And I'd assess the capability gaps by looking at people's A3s. So that's just a few words to start with. Building a lean management system, in addition to getting your hands dirty and starting at the bottom with small point improvements, getting involved in an A3 process to learn how to think, getting involved in a kata process, which Bill's going to talk about after this, an extremely important path of practicing how to think. All of those pieces are great, but you also, somebody in the organization, also needs to take a view, begin to assemble a view as to how all of these pieces fit together to deliver business results, as I've talked about before. Now, lean folks get enthused about the tools and about their process and about the improvement, don't always pay too much attention to business problem or delivering the business results. They're kind of afterthoughts. They can't be afterthoughts. They have to be part of the story. So I'm going to use an example that I've used with many. I'm going to use a hospital example, but it's an example I've used with many executive teams in quite different industries to help them reflect on how they think about their whole business as a system. And we need to do that as well if we're later on to deploy the capabilities we've built to maximum effect to have business results. So, when we first started looking at the grocery industry, we mapped the supply chain and we saw all the inventories in the supply chain and the Muda involved in managing all of that inventories. Forget about this for the moment. And what we discovered, in fact, that wasn't the problem. That was a symptom of a problem which actually was the problem of the information flowing backwards. And most of the chaos which resulted in excess capacity in inventories in the system was as a result of the way information was managed. And in fact, most of the chaos in the system was not caused by unpredictability in customer demand. That was very stable. Most of the chaos was created by the way the information was managed upstream in the system. So I always say, well, let us, first of all, look at demand. And for a hospital, you talk to a doctor, they will tell you every patient's different. Well, not so. Look at the analysis of patients by clinical type, and you'll find that 8% of patients account for 50% of the work of the hospital. So let's start with those 8%, maybe 15, 20 clinical conditions, maybe even less than that, that account for the bulk of the high volume work going through the hospital. And let's focus on those. And then they say, yes, everything's unpredictable and work is chaos. In a hospital, most work is firefighting. And so we said, okay, let's actually track all of the patients that come into in this case, the emergency room, and track how many patients were then admitted into the hospital, because obviously a lot were sent straight home with a bit of tender care. And let's actually do a statistical analysis of the variance of that demand coming in, which is supposedly unpredictable. And we see it's, if you put statistical control limits in, you'll see that it's all common cause variation. There's no special cause variation at all. Classic Six Sigma technique. So all of the demand within a fairly wide band, of course, is actually very predictable. And we ought to be able to design a system to cope with that degree of flexibility. And notice that, in fact, there's no seasonal pattern to the demand. Everybody says winter's a lot worse. Well, in fact, it turns out that all of the chaos is actually created by the way we run the hospital. It's created by the fact that we only work 5 out of 7 days. The car park, the doctors and the car park is empty on Saturdays and Sundays. Don't know in Iceland, but certainly in the UK. And we're now debating, oh, maybe this should be a 7-day service. Goodness. Right, we're at that point. So a 7-day service would help. Then we discover that, in fact, the way the budgets are set drives a lot of, and the fact that money is allocated and nobody really knows what budget they're going to have until halfway through the year, so they can't really develop a plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So actually budgets drive much of the chaos as well. And then the way doctors take their leave, they all go skiing in the winter, also creates problems. So my point here is if you start digging and looking at the demand, or looking at the types of customers, or you look at what customers really want, don't believe the myths that have grown up in the organization. Go and do the analysis and look. And you will find that most of the problems, the chaos that underlies most of the waste that you see is actually your own fault. And that's a good thing, because that means we can do something about it. We can't blame customers, and there's no way we can influence customers. It's our fault. So actually, the demand coming into the hospital is actually very predictable, and we need to design a system that can cope with that variation, and then we need to interrogate the causes of some of that common cause variation, and quite possibly reduce that. So that's all I'm saying there is, first of all, really understand your demand. Whatever business you're in, what is the real demand, and what is the demand that you see at your part of the business? And there's a big gap between the two. So the next step I would take then is the slide I showed before. Is then what are the routings? What are the types of flows that we're dealing with? And in this case, they told me there were lots and lots of different paths through the hospital. I take the roof off, fly at 100 feet over the hospital, follow the patient's paths, and you see there are only 2 essential flows, one an unplanned flow and a planned flow. And the overspill from the chaos and the unplanned flow, which we know is very stable and predictable, actually is causing the chaos in the planned flow. So all of that is self-created. So now we see there are only 2 flows, and we're seeing also how critical support services are to enabling those flows to operate. We can actually begin to see the business not just as the product moving through the factory or the patient moving through the hospital, who in this case is the product and is experiencing how they are being dealt with. So it's even more critical that the experience of delivering the service is good as well. But we also have to think about all of the support services, which at the moment, in this case, are run as completely separate businesses with separate plans, not linked to tack time. Don't even know what tack time is. So if we're going to do anything, we both have to look at the queues, we could have to look at the cause of the defects and problems, and we have to see where most of the noise in the system is being generated or is having the biggest bottleneck. And in this case, as I said, it's in the back end of this system. In the grocery industry, it's the front end of the system. In every system, there are different causes of variation. So I fly at the top. I drew this diagram. I couldn't get any doctor to draw this diagram. But when I drew it, they said, yeah, okay, well, that's probably right. What they see is this. And this is why you want to avoid going into a hospital. This is a typical, this is 40% of the volume is shortness of breath. We said, okay, let's take a typical patient and let's follow them through all of the steps through the process. That's what all these process boxes are. Those are boxes of where something's happening to the patient, where something is being delivered or taken from the patient, but something is happening to the patient. And then we look at all the little triangles in between and see the weights. But we see this spaghetti of stuff that goes away, tests and results that go away, that then have to come back at the next point to trigger the ability to move on, and so on and so forth. And we see how critical those things are. And from this, we could see, we could confirm that, in fact, patients typically stay 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe more, many more, in some cases, longer than necessary, blocking up beds for other patients coming through. So our task is to see the detail, and this is just a typical map, has a transformative experience on the team that developed this map, that went and assembled this map, and blows the mind of the executive, who hospital managers rarely actually get to the shop floor, let alone understand what's going on the shop floor, and I'm not being unkind here. So this gives us a picture of the whole process. And yes, there are hundreds and hundreds of different problems we could tackle. But the key thing then is a disciplined structure that will enable us to focus on the important things that, if we're really going to redesign this and improve this, where they are. And we use the A3 like everybody else. We develop an A3 action plan with the team. In fact, the value stream map is the second stage of the action plan. I'll come back to the first stage in this case, which is establishing that the flow of patients was the critical part, was the critical problem facing the hospital. So I'll come back to how we established that at a high level to start with. Well, here we have summarized the value stream map. It's a little tidier than the actual map, but it contains more or less the same information. And we've defined a target condition. And we've done root cause analysis. You don't need to read all of this. This is all summarized in a book we've written on the hospital system called Making Hospitals Work. Done our root cause analysis and gone through lots and lots of different exercises of what are the essential root causes. So this is the end result of many iterations of this A3. And we've come up with a future state, not an ideal state, a future state that we could achieve certainly within a year. And from that future state, we then defined, and you can't read that, I'm afraid, there, a plan for all of the intervention steps that would be necessary to get from the current state to the future state. This is a classic A3. And then where we would follow up, what we would learn from it, and how we would reflect on that for the next cycle. So this is a high-level A3, whereas before we were experimenting with departmental A3s and so on. I'll come back to that. So extremely good way of going through the diagnosis and treatment of organizational issues in a systematic way, following PDCA. We want to jump to countermeasures. We want to not worry too much about the analysis. Or we've got a current state map and we're in love with the current state map and there are no future state. I've seen that often. No future state. We didn't quite get to the future state. So it's obvious if you haven't got a future state, if you're stuck at the current state, it's obvious where the thought process has got to. So that's fine. One of the key tasks was how do we establish in this situation, a visual management system for seeing the work. And again, through experimentation, we did this in 2-3 hospitals before we developed a system that actually many of them. We need to manage the hospital. And we need to manage the wards. And we need to manage the improvement projects. So at the ward level, simply a visual indication of whether patients are ready to go or not. Are they green or are they red? Or could they be ready to go within the day if the test result came back, if a package of care was agreed, etc. So who are the potentials, who's ready to go and who are potentially ready to go that day and who are not and should stay in the hospital? And we do that at every ward, and we aggregate that every 2 hours to a hospital level board, where we have, for all the beds in the hospital, we have a current status updated every 2 hours of readiness to go. That allows us then to target actions on making sure that the exits that day are going to match the people who are waiting to come in to beds. And making sure that the test results and the things that need to happen to turn the patients who may be ready to go, could be ready to go, actually happens. Now, easier said than done. There's lots of complications along the way, but in principle, we can see the state of the business on that visual hospital board updated every 2 hours, and we can drive action plans down to every ward to ensure that the flow out, the demand to get out, matches the demand to get in. Now, at a ward level, it's not just ready to get out, but we also do have a plan for every patient from when they come in. How many days do we expect them to be in? And for common procedures, what are the actions that will be necessary? Blood tests, ward rounds, doctor's visits, etc. What is the work that will be need to done to get them to be ready to go home? So for each patient, we have plan versus actual, which makes the work visible. It's what you do in a factory. It's what you should do in an office, everywhere. So we can see deviations. Have all the things that should happen, happened. Simple as that. It drives the work. It makes the work visible. It makes it clear what is preventing the work happening. But also, aggregating this way from the work, we can actually aggregate down to how many therapies across the hospital need to be delivered that day, how many blood tests, how many ultrasound scans, etc. need to be delivered that day. It gives us the tact time for all of those support services. So now we can develop a plan for each of the support activities to actually meet tact and respond within the cycle to tact, to redesign the services to respond within the cycle. Something that never happened before. So we're connecting everything together, from support activities, the main flow, to managing capacity in the hospital. Terrific. Has a dramatic effect in reducing unnecessary length of stay within 6 weeks. But that's great. And we thought we solved the problem until we started talking to management, who we had not seen really very much during this process. And we discovered, this is an extreme situation, that's why healthcare is so interesting. It's a management-free zone. You have to build a management system because there isn't one. We discovered what we called a Bermuda Triangle. In the UK, at least, trying to run the whole hospital system as one organization, the NHS, a bit like trying to run the People's Army in China, or the Indian Railways, and the NHS is the third largest employer in the world, if you think about it that way. Impossible to manage. So you're getting constant initiatives, well-intentioned initiatives coming from headquarters all the time, which all create more work for managers. And you also have now the budget squeeze coming. You know, doctors used to think you frighten politicians to give you more money. That's the way the system worked. There isn't any more money now. Doctors haven't quite got the message. So we looked at the work of management. And on one wall, we assembled all the projects in the hospital, and there were, I think it was 514 different projects. There were 350 targets that were measured every month and reviewed every month. You imagine the management load. And you're getting more from headquarters. So what happens? People spend all their time in management meetings justifying why the projects that they were allocated on top of their overcrowded day job. We did a time analysis of key managers responsible for these projects. Their day job is 150% of their time available. So these projects are never going to get done. So there is an incomplete mismatch. Management does not connect with the shop floor because they're all tied up in meetings. And the shop floor just keeps managing its chaos. So actually connecting the top floor, as we got into this process, as we understood started from the patient, we realized what was missing was actually not a visual management system, it was a hospital management system. So in the NHS system, what happens is you exceed your budget, you fire the CEO, and you write off the debts, and you start again. And nothing changes. So this is a hopeless situation. So how do we start to unravel the fact that there are too many projects, management's time is being eaten up, they're never on the shop floor, operations never improves? Well, you start by asking managers, CEOs, and do this in your business, what are the things that keep you awake at night? In the NHS, it was very clear because there were a set of targets, mandated, centrally driven targets. I'm worried about reducing hospital-acquired infections. You do not want to go into a hospital. It's one of the dangerous, it's the second largest cause of unnecessary deaths. It is. These are unintended consequences of poor delivery, service delivery. So hospital-acquired infections, seeing emergency patients within 4 hours of admission, seeing elective patients within 18 weeks of referral, reducing length of stay and reducing costs. So those are the things that worry chief executives every day. Which is the most important? Which would you do first? If you could only do one, which would you do? Length of stay? Infections. There's a nice conflict between length of stay and time. You're right, and you're right. So do a cross-impact analysis. Down the bottom left-hand corner, bottom right-hand, doing a cross-impact analysis. If you just reduced infections, that would be good for patients, but it wouldn't impact any of the rest. If you reduce costs, that would probably have a negative impact on everything else, on all the service delivery and the quality metrics. Because basically, this is quality, 3 deliveries and cost, isn't this? QCD. So the cross-impact analysis is that if I focus on reducing length of stay, I will by definition also be focusing on hospital-acquired infections, and I will reduce the length of stay you're exposed to infections. And I will free up access time, and I will also have an impact on cost because I will free up capacity to manage more patients with existing resources. There's very powerful exercise for senior managers to go through. So this is one of the powers of policy deployment. One of the powers. And this gives, if you then educate managers in how to define the projects, walk them through, see where the thing's broken, develop A3, project management skills, etc. Management will begin to have the confidence to deselect all of those unnecessary projects and just focus on a few because they will have confidence that those few will actually result in something. So that's the first stage, and I quite understand people being negative towards X matrices. Jim and I tried this on ourselves many years ago. We had Pat Lancaster, one of our great lean heroes, came and did it to us. And we could always dream up a lot more projects and things we'd like to do than we've got time for. And we found it extremely hard to do. But actually, as part of the policy deployment process, forget the tool, think of policy deployment as a process. The process begins by looking at what's wrong with your process. Then, what are the needs of the organization? Then, how do I begin this process of translating the vital few into projects, but also, how do I actually complete that loop? How do I, again, use PDCA in having the confidence to deselect, and so on? And recently, we've come back to policy deployment as it's become fashionable, and we are doing it, all of us doing it in the Lean Global Network in a much more rigorous way. And we've begun to use A3s as well as the X chart, and it's extraordinarily powerful as a discipline for the connectivity of the boxes. This axis, basically, those 5 worries that keep chief executives awake at night, form essentially the major objectives. And then these are the projects, again, selected from our whole separate brainstorming activity, then verify, are those projects going to deliver on these metrics? And what would be the metrics if we did so? And what would be the contributory outcomes of those projects that may add up to delivering those objectives? So this is actually a very powerful tool. Whether you use X matrix or not, you will go through the same process of what are our vital few, what are the projects, what are the metrics, what are the results, and am I be able to track performance of these projects over time? So this is a very good way of summarizing it if you have the stomach for it. I suggest not until year 2, 3 into your policy deployment process. Nevertheless, if you want to see an example of the visual hospital and the policy deployment process, go on our website, leanuk.org, and you will see videos of people telling the story of how they did this. In the middle of our website, there are, I think, 5 or 6 videos telling the story of both the visual hospital system and also this policy deployment process. As we get into policy deployment, in this case, we're only using it for 3 levels. You will only have time to ever go through 3 rounds of catchball. So Toyota only use it at 3 levels in the organization. More than that, you're just making life complicated. But again, in this case, we're using it at board level, at the trust board level. And in this case, there are 3 factories or 3 hospitals. So we're using it at hospital level, and then we're using it at every site at project level as well. The site level we're reviewing every day, hospital level every 7 days, and every 30 days at trust level. But the trust meets, their meetings actually take place in one of these hospitals. So it's simply an add-on to the 7-day meeting. So we now have a way of prioritizing, we have a way of linking the top and the bottom, and we have the confidence to deselect. So we're now beginning to have a management system that allows us to view the objectives, to surface the contributions towards those objectives from each department, and a mechanism for escalating problems quickly, so it gives us a very live situation report on the real-time situation in the hospital, not data that comes monthly Doctors are fantastic at fiddling data. It is all mostly lies. It's mostly doctored to I tell you not, this is true. They are brilliant at this, but a visual hospital, simply the problems that are escalating from the visual hospital, a cause of delays that is delaying admissions, for instance, or a support service that is not synchronizing to tact time, is very obvious. And if that issue isn't resolved, it's escalated very quickly. That gives you an upward flow of what's wrong with the process and gives you the ability to align. Ability to, thank you, to also then deploy the right projects. So this is after a couple of years of doing lean in the pathology department, in IT, on the wards, in the assessment room, etc. So we've done lots of point Kaizen. Now we're trying to pull the pieces together in a management system. So this is the Bermuda Triangle that we are trying to build. And the NHS is now breaking up. They're developing basically hospitals becoming independent service providers. Now they have to deal with a new set of commissioning bodies that have even less money to spend. So there's got to be a dialogue now about how we can deliver services, the existing services, with less resource. But we're actually able to cope with 30% more patients with the existing resource. So there's hope. And then there's results. This shows the length of stay over the period of time in which they're gradually implementing Visual Hospital, just about to, at that point, introduce the Hoshin process, the policy deployment process. And it's the best performing hospital in that year, won the Hospital of the Year award. So results, we can demonstrate results. And I tell you, once we started delivering results, we got the attention of senior management. We would have not got the attention of the finance director, the HR director, the operations director, the chief executive, had we not been delivering results. Visual Hospital delivered results. Management came and said, what is going on? That was the opportunity to say, let's show you what's going on. And the finance director in the first hospital, we seriously did this after our experiments early on. He's the biggest champion because he can see that this is delivering results. And interestingly, we may, pillory doctors and so on, and I've done so unfairly today. You may have other tribes in your business who are equivalent to doctors, but it's not difficult to get doctors on side because you say to them, all we're trying to do is use the same scientific approach to diagnosing and treating organizational problems as you use to diagnose and treat a patient. And they go, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? And we say, yeah, there's a big gap between what you do and why you don't do that. And that's the gap we need to close. So that can't be closed by teaching people or writing books. That can only come through experiments. I don't have a problem waiting for test results anymore. But that's not the end. All we've done here is build a management system and a visual management system for managing an existing operation. We've now gone on to experiment. We're doing live experiments now. Experiments. It's the scientific method. We're conducting a scientific experiment into near-patient testing with small diagnostic machines. Near-patient testing means none of the results have to go away to the laboratory and go through a factory-like laboratory process. In the emergency room, I can get a test, I can get a result right there. In the ward, during the ward round, I can get a test, I can get the results right there. It's going to fundamentally transform the way work is done. That's just one innovation. It's going to fundamentally transform the way work is done both at the front end and in clinics and at the back end in the wards. And there are many more of those kind of innovations that we now can see the potential effectiveness of because we can now see the process. So that's what I mean by the real benefit of lean is having created stability and some kind of visibility in your existing process. The real benefit is how would you redesign it with that knowledge? And how would you assess what capabilities I need to build in order to be able to do that? In whom? Who needs to know what to be able to achieve this outcome? I said this morning on my so what slide that the real power of lean is that we focus on building the capabilities in order to streamline the process, to create value for customers. And the way we create capabilities is through learning by doing. Showing people, reading, going on training courses, all okay, but actually you only learn lean by doing it, practicing it. And it always looks easy when you start. Oh, that's just common sense. Well, yes, but it's not the common sense we actually use. That's the gap we have to close. So, thank you very much.